Congressman Richard Neal is our guest in studio this morning. Let's go on the record. His district is Western Massachusetts, but his influence is coast to coast. The chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee looking to steer the country through a devastating pandemic. With just days now to the election, the stakes are high. Right now, let's go on the record.
From WCVB Channel 5, the inside word from Washington to Beacon Hill. Today's newsmakers are going on the record.
Welcome to OTR on this Sunday morning. I'm Ed Harding, along with News Center 5's political reporter Janet Wu. We are now just 9 days away from the election and at a critical point in the pandemic. And as always, we continue to follow all social distancing protocols here in Studio C. And at the center desk, as you can see this morning, is Congressman Richard Neal. He's a candidate for re-election in the state's 1st District, where he has represented Western Massachusetts for more than 3 decades. Mr. Chairman, thank you for joining us. Great to have you with us this morning.
Thank you, Ed. Delighted to be with you both.
Happy Sunday. Regardless of who wins the White House, Mr. Chairman, the winner really needs a cooperative Congress to get anything done. You've been following the congressional races across the country very closely. How likely do you think it is that the Democrats could win both the House and the Senate?
Well, I think the margin to look to is if Vice President Biden can win by 4 to 6 points, I think that almost ensures that the Senate will move to Democratic hands. But I also think the candidates are still the story. And you always have to start with a good candidate. And the candidates that we have in the most important seats that are up for grabs on the Senate side, they're all superb. And I think that we win the Senate. I think we pick up another 10 to 15 seats in the House. And I think based on current polling data, which we all based up, again, what happened 4 years ago, we have to take with a grain of salt. But things look pretty good at the moment.
If I could just pick out a couple of states where there are some hot Senate races, where do you think that how will it turn out? There's Lindsey Graham in South Carolina. There is the Maine, and there's the Arizona races. Where do you think those will end up washing out?
It seems to be a clear victory in Colorado. It strikes me that former Governor Hickenlooper is on the verge of victory. I think in the case of our candidate Kelly in Arizona, I think that he likely wins. I think that the race in South Carolina is challenging. It's pretty close. But remember that the challenge we always have in some of those really red states is that Donald Trump is on the ballot. And I think that makes it harder for Democratic candidates. But at the moment, I think you could get to those 3 to 4 seats that we're going to need, given the fact that it's going to be a real challenge to hold on to the seat in Alabama.
How do you read Maine, just out of curiosity?
Well, the polling is leaning in our direction. I think that it's very difficult for Senator Collins, only because she has a president who is very popular with the base of the Republican Party, but not very popular with independent voters, and certainly anathema to Democratic voters. And the coalition that she's assembled over the years generally included all 3.
So let's talk about the reality where we sit right now, late October. Democratic voters in about a half dozen states are getting threats allegedly from the Proud Boys, President Trump supporters. But we now know that they're from Iran. So it appears those emails that were sent out hurt both sides. Is that fair to say? What do you think?
Well, I don't think we should ever be naive about the ability now of technology to try to influence democracies across Western Europe as well as the United States. There's ample evidence that Russia has attempted, whether it's European Union or the United States or any other places, to offer undue influence through the use of technology. I think even here in the United States, we all know what happened 4 years ago. You can argue about the FBI assessment, you can argue about the national security assessment, but what you can't argue about 4 years ago is that the Russians tried very hard, with some success, to influence the outcome of the elections.
And the latest word is that many in the FBI are more concerned about the Russians than they are about Iran at this particular point. Is that fair to say?
Well, when you look at the National Security Advisory, Iran seems to have had more of a tangential influence. Russia is the main perpetrator of the challenge. China is getting better at it. North Korea certainly has a role, but Russia is the one that assembles the data, and they attempt, I think, through using some of their former states like Estonia and other places like that, to get that information out so that it's hard to trace some of it. But there's universal acknowledgement that the Russians are the main perpetrator of this information.
So let's talk about voter fraud. It now consumes just about every waking hour of any political operative that's working right now. How confident are you in the election process that all legitimate votes will be counted and there'll be no hacking, despite or because of what the FBI is now saying?
Well, I'm pretty confident about the voting. I intend to vote in person I still like that idea. I do it obviously for a number of reasons, not the least of which I get to say hello to friends and neighbors and polling place workers. But there's another part of this that, again, I might be dating myself. I think the integrity of the system is best adhered to by maintaining a paper ballot trail. And I think that that's what we need to make sure of, even as we embrace new forms of technology. I know when I talk to some young people, they think that we ought to just go to online voting. I think that given the ability of outside influence, that has the potential to be a disaster. So I think that there ought to be some connection to the ballot as it's placed and then the ballot as it's counted. Keeping a paper trail is essential.
Well, of course, you know, in Massachusetts we do have a paper ballot trail, but in many other states we do not. So I go back to my initial question. How confident are you that the votes will be counted legitimately?
I'm pretty confident. I think that there's enough attention that's been paid to it. I think the scrutiny that has been brought by competing arguments makes sure that the integrity of the election cycle will be upheld.
So let's talk about, you know, where Americans are right now. The election obviously is vital, and that's on the horizon, but we're living in a pandemic. So, and with high unemployment and people who just need jobs and need money, they need to survive. So first part of the question is, how likely is it there will be another stimulus package before the election?
It's very likely. I talked to Speaker Pelosi, who I think has been steadfast and done a really good job on this, acknowledging that 23 million people, members of the American family, are collecting unemployment benefits even as we speak. Our hospitals are going to need more money. The virus is surging. The economy is slowing. I think therein you find the ample room for agreement. I've been in constant contact with my Republican counterparts on the Senate Finance Committee, hoping that we can find some sort of an agreement. The parameters have already been drafted in the sense we're going to need another round of $1,200 checks for single filers under $75,000, $2,400 for joint filers under $150,000. We're going to need to expand the retention tax credit. I think that there's a chance here to expand the earned income tax credit as well. But not to miss the point, our hospitals are going to need money going forward. I've had much contact with Governor Baker. We're in broad agreement on this. And I have brought the arguments of the people of Massachusetts as well across the country, understanding the Ways and Means Committee wrote most of the CARES Act.
So again, you believe it would come before the election or before the end of the calendar year?
I think we might reach an agreement before the election. I think we only have a week to go, as you know, 9 days out before we would have a vote. And I don't see us being summoned back to Washington next week unless Senator McConnell were to give up some of his intransigence and move off the number that he's offered. Look, there are some competing voices here. The president says go bigger than Speaker Pelosi. Senator McConnell says $500 billion is the ceiling. And Speaker Pelosi has already moved the Democratic position from $3.4 trillion in the HEROES Act, which, by the way, passed in May of this year. And she's brought that number down to $2 trillion. She wants assistance to state and local governments. We're in unison with the governor and the legislature on that. She wants more money for the retention tax credit, more money for our hospitals, and another round of stimulus checks. Think of the CARES Act this way, Ed. The CARES Act was about promoting stability. The HEROES Act is going to be about stimulus. And
with the $2 trillion figure now being bandied about, do you think it'll be around $2 trillion, or do you think there'll be more?
Well, now I'm going to put on my speculation hat, Janet, since you raised the question, and here's the answer. I think if Joe Biden wins, the number will be closer to $3 trillion. And I think that at that stage, good sense will overcome all of us, and we'll proceed to the bigger package, understanding there's a rent crisis coming as well. People can't make their rents. That means the landlord can't make the mortgage payments.
Right.
That means the community banker and the credit union, which overwhelmingly are the originators of mortgages, they start to have contagion. So I think that this is pretty far reaching, and that these conversations now are ongoing, but I must tell you that we could be in for a very difficult winter. 20% of the renters in America are now at least one payment behind on rent.
Well, and the headlines frequently go to the renters, but it's the mortgages and the landlords that you're talking about, which is the second part of this equation. So it's not just a singular piece that could fall.
Well, those realities leach in.
Right.
That's how the challenge confronts us, and I think that understanding that is really important. And in the HEROES Act, we provided a lot of relief to renters so that they would be able to get through this pandemic. One of the challenges here you have in terms of the economics of it is the following. The idea in the CARES Act, and it would be pursued in the HEROES Act, is this: that by getting money into the hands of people at the lower end of the economic spectrum, not only do you give them the opportunity for day-to-day sustenance and the needs, but you also simultaneously create demand. That's why we did what we did. We used electronic means. We're still trying to track down people who make under $12,000 a year, which as single filers, that happens. There are about 9 million people that we are still trying to reach with the CARES Act money, only because of the fact that it's hard to reach them because they're not tax filers.